Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. It is great to be back. I finally have my cast off. I have my boot off. I can walk, but not very well. And it is great to have Dave Warnock on as my guest. Hello, Dave.
Hey, good to be here. How you doing?
I am doing great. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good.
Good. Okay. Dave has not been on the show before, and I think most people know you, but there might be a few in the audience that don't know you. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Ah, used to be a Christian. Now I'm an atheist, and I have ALS. What's the next question?
Okay.
No,
Um,
I'm just kidding. I was an evangelical fundamentalist Christian for 35 to 37 years. I'm not sure when exactly that stopped. I have this date in time on when I became a Christian. I was born again on December 26, 1973, and my new life began. And but when it ended, I'm not really clear on it. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 2010 to 2012, I came
okay.
to the conclusion that I no longer believed in anything that the Bible had to say. That I didn't believe. Um, Dave ain't got time for long intros. That's right, junk shop. Um, but I came to the conclusion it wasn't true and that I'd believed a lie my whole life, and I began to identify as an atheist. So I've been in that category in the last 10 years, and then about 4 years ago, I was diagnosed with ALS, which is Lou Gehrig's disease, more commonly known, which is a terminal disease that affects the motor neuron, the muscles, and so my muscles have been slowly dying over the last 4 years. And when I got ALS, shortly after that, I began to do a thing called Dying Out Loud, which kind of became an organization. And I started traveling. Prior to that, I was kind of a mind my own business atheist, and I wasn't doing a lot of activism. But once I got ALS, I realized that I wanted to speak up about some things, um, primarily living and dying, how we live and how we die, and then secondarily, um, what evangelicalism does, and the damage it does, and uh, the harmful ways that it affects people and affected me. And so started going on podcasts and YouTube shows and traveling and speaking and started my own show and wrote a book. Been pretty busy the last 3.5 years. So that's kind of up to date with me.
Okay. There is a link to the book, and a link to your show, Dying Out Loud, in the description. And I am trying to get a picture of the book up for us. There we go.
Hmm.
The link that I have is actually to the Amazon site where you can purchase a copy.
Okay.
And
I do like to tell people before I forget, if they do, I have people requesting a signed copy. We're happy to do that. It takes a little while depending on our travel schedule and other schedules, but you can write me. There it is.
yep, there's the
It's actually a picture of me and my mom, circa about 1957.
mm,
Um, uh, but you can get it on Amazon. If you do want a signed copy, just write us at daveoutloud@gmail.com and we will correspond with you and get that to you. If you live, we can't ship it outside the U.S. It's just too expensive unless you want to pay some exorbitant shipping. I had a guy in, oh God, where was he? Slovenia
mm,
that wanted a copy, and
mhm.
I said, "Hey, I'll ship it anywhere." We did the research. I think it was like $80 to ship it,
Oh my
and
goodness.
so he thought, "Nah, I'll just order it."
Yeah, I ordered bathrobes for all the adults on my personalized bathrobes for all the adults on my Christmas list this year, and I
Hmm.
ordered them from a small business on Etsy. And of course, they have to do their own personal shipping rather than having, some kind of a contract shipping. And I paid almost as much for the shipping as I did for the bathrobes, at least for the ones that went to California.
I'll bet. Yeah, shipping is not cheap.
Mhm. Um, Okay, the next question I had for you, the show that you do, I know that, you're making some changes to the show. Tell us what you've been doing and what changes you're going through right now.
Well, as you told me off camera backstage, you were checking out the show last night and realized, oh my God, it's the last one.
Mhm,
So my YouTube channel is Dave Warnock Dying Out Loud. But the show is called That GD Show, and it can stand for That Goddamn Show, or it stands more accurately for Genevieve and Dave. My co-host is Genevieve, a brilliant young woman I met on TikTok. I found on TikTok and reached out to her and said we should do a show because she came from a non-evangelical background. She was a lifelong atheist, and so I wanted to have a different perspective. And so for about a year and a half, we did a weekly Monday night call-in show, live stream, and we had um, interesting guests. Some, well-known people, well-known atheists like Seth Andrews and Matt Dillahunty and Aaron Ra and others. But we also had guests that had more to do with a subject matter. Like we had a panel about abortion just before Roe v. Wade was overturned, and we had a doctor from Texas who's an abortion specialist on, as well as some clinic defenders. And we had a show on gun violence, school shootings. We had a guest on whose dad was a school shooter back in the day. So we really tackled interesting and difficult subjects, and I'm told that that's really what set the show apart.
mhm,
In that it was unlike other shows on YouTube that had a guest or had calls that argued about Christianity and atheism and God's real, no, he's not. Yes, he is. No, he's not. Um, so we wanted to try to tackle ideas and issues that were not being talked about as much in the secular space, and then look at them through a secular lens. So I really think we did that. I'm really proud of the show. I hated to close it down, and I can go into more details on why we did that if you want. But at this point, I felt like I needed to take a break from it just to really focus my energy and my focus on a couple of other projects that I felt were time sensitive because I'm running out of time.
Do you know how much time you have left?
I don't. That's the
Okay.
the problem with ALS is that you just don't know. Mine is a very slow progressing form of ALS, and you're told when you do the research when you first get it that you have 3 to 5 years. Some people say 3 to 5 years from diagnosis. Most often they say 3 to 5 years from onset of symptoms, because like anything, you could have symptoms a long time and not know you have it. You can think it's something else, or you can just not go to the doctor. So basically, the consensus is you got 3 to 5 years of life after you start having symptoms. Well, I've been having symptoms for over 4 years. Um,
Mhm,
and my symptoms started in my fingers and hands and progressed to my arms and now to my legs. And everything's getting harder to do. As far as how long I have, it really depends on how long I want it to go,
mhm,
because I have no intention of going all the way to the end, wherein I'm lying in a bed, unable to move, unable to do anything without help. There's no quality of life there, and I'm not interested in a life that doesn't have any quality in it. So I'll probably end things sooner would would than they would end if it took its natural course.
mhm.
So I'm estimating a couple of years is what
Okay,
I'm estimating.
okay.
That's a long answer to a simple question.
It is not a simple question.
You're right, it's not.
You know, the real answer is none of us know how much time we have.
That's true.
Any one of us could be gone tomorrow. Um, but on the other hand, some of us have a better idea of what the best prognosis for ourselves is.
Yeah, yeah. I like to put it like we all have a clock ticking
Mhm,
in terms of, I've heard it said you start dying the day you're born.
mhm,
Um, we all have a clock ticking. It's just that my clock is sitting out on my desk looking at me every day. And that's kind of a different. It's a difference. It's a blessing and a curse because it does make me more aware of my impending death, but it also makes me more aware of my impending death. That
Mhm.
said, it causes me to focus more on the days that I have and make the most of them and seize the moment, seize the day, and not let life just pass me by casually because I'm aware that I don't have a lot of time left, so I have to make the most of it.
Mage Greywolf says, I'm going to live forever or die trying.
That's a good way to put it.
Mhm. Mhm. I'd like to acknowledge everyone in the chat. We have a lot of people here: Jenny Morgan, Mage Grey Wolf, Randy Wingle, Johnny Rapine, Sandy, Lubilar, God equals the square root of -1, Julie Wine and Reason, May Atkinson, Junk Shop Library, Mr. Shadow Kitty, the Trusty Ape Podcast, Logan Fisher,
I love these names.
yeah, Joe Stinkpot. Uh, I'm not sure how to say this one. Deheiken? It looks
Man,
German.
yeah. Daiken. 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 You have to say it with
And Lublar says, WWDD, carp the diem.
You can't swear on this show.
You
What would
can, but
Dave do?
since he
Carp the
put
effing diem.
right, since he put the ellipses in there, so did I.
I understand.
Mm. Oh, and Von der Schnee is here as well. Mr. Shadow Kitty said, I had a dear friend who had full blown AIDS. He lived more than a decade after being told that he had less than a year, even though he smoked and drank like there was no tomorrow.
There you go.
Mm. And it's pronounced
Finish.
Heikkinen,
Hey,
and
Kenan.
it's Finnish.
Hey, Kenan.
That's interesting.
Hike. Hike. Nice. We
Mm.
learned something tonight.
Yes, we did. Okay. One of the questions that I had for you was now I have started your memoir, Childish Things. Um, and I bought it when I was at the Better Conference,
Oh.
and I bought Seth's at the same time, and I started Seth's first. And then Andrew Seidel's book came out. So I put Seth's book aside and I read Andrew Seidel's book. Then I finished Seth's book, and then I started your book. And so I'm
Oh.
only halfway through it. Um, Part of the reason I don't read like I used to read about a book a week, but since my scoliosis surgery, it's difficult for me to find a position that I can sit in comfortably.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time, I sit leaning forward on a table, and that's not, that's how I read. But it's not like it used to be where I just really enjoyed it. I can't sit where I'm comfortable enough that I
Mm-hmm.
really enjoy the reading, and so I don't read anywhere near as much as I used to.
Mm.
But anyway, I'm about halfway through the book, and I have not gotten to your deconversion yet, but there have definitely been hints along the way
Mm-hmm.
of different events that are obviously leading into it. So I know this is going to be a spoiler for me and for anyone else that hasn't read the book, but without spoiling too much of the book, what led to your deconversion?
Well, it's just like let me throw a question back at you because you
Okay.
alluded to something. You said that there were hints along the way.
Hmm.
What, like for instance, what kind of a hint would you have seen that you
I
would look at
saw
that and go, "Oh, there's
hints.
something there that Dave's saying. There's an implication here."
I saw well, the biggest one was when you mentioned when you talked about the death of Rachel,
Oh yeah.
um, and
Mhm.
your frustration with God,
Yeah.
and that's a natural reaction for anyone to have. But I also know that when I went through major crises as a believer, I never got all the way to questioning God. I
Mm-mm.
always went to God has some kind of a plan for this. The biggest crisis that I faced in my own life was the loss of my first child.
Mhm.
My first child was stillborn,
Okay.
and I did struggle with that a lot.
Yeah.
How can God possibly need this child? There's people say, "Oh, God needed another angel," and I know you heard that one too.
Oh yeah.
And that's just stupid.
Yeah.
Um,
God's greedy. He's gotten a lot of those angels over the years.
right,
When's he
right.
going to have enough? Dear God.
Yeah. And, you know, oh, God was trying to teach you something.
Yeah.
God's trying to teach you to be more humble. God's trying to teach you to minister to other people in this situation. Well, okay. And that is true. I have been able to minister to other people in that situation.
Because they
However,
lost a child too, because God
right,
needed their child as well.
right.
I mean,
But if
where
God
does
would
that
just
end?
stop taking the children,
Yeah.
right, exactly. That God wouldn't need to do this. Exactly.
Well, I
Um,
think you touched on it. There were a series of events, and that's why I put those in the book. It's just like a slow burn. It's a build up, and it is a deconstruction story, if you will, because it's my story and I deconstructed.
mhm,
Um, but there's no one thing.
mhm,
It's a series of a lifelong series of events or circumstances wherein a God who was present would have been present. A God who was loving would have been loving. A God who was kind would have been kind. Time after time after time, I found that the people in my life showed more compassion, myself included, compassion and empathy than the God I was serving. And
mm,
there's something wrong with that. Um,
mhm,
when the people in your life are more loving and compassionate than the God you serve. But like you said, we don't ever allow ourselves to go all the way and ask the big questions because we're taught from the beginning of things, whether you are raised as a child in this or come to it as a teenager like I did, immediately you're met with these God has ways that we don't understand, and
mhm,
his ways are higher than ours. And he answers every prayer, but sometimes the answer is not now. And all of this bullshit that runs counter to what the Bible actually says, because the Bible actually says, and Jesus had more to say about prayer than probably any other subject, including hell or abortion or homosexuality. He had more to say about if you ask anything, it'll be given you. And he used several different analogies. If two or more gathered in my name, it'll be done. If you ask, as if you have faith as a grain of mustard seed. So on and on and on, Jesus said over and over, if you ask this, God will give you this answer. So, but we're told that his answers are not of our understanding. You can't trust your own intellect. You can't trust your own emotions. And so you stuff it down again and again and again and again, and you move on and you double down and you make excuses. I like to put it this way. I eventually got tired of making excuses for God's poor behavior. And that's how I look at it. That over the years, time after time after time, God didn't show up. And the God that I believed in, the God that the Bible describes, was present and active and answered prayer and led us and guided us and showed us his will. And it wasn't a God that was just some distant sovereignty that we tipped our cap to every now and then, like some mainstream religion like Lutherans or Episcopals. Um, that's how I viewed them. Like they served some God who was distant and uninvolved. My God was involved, supposedly. I was taught that from the beginning, and yet I never experienced it. Over and over, my niece's death, an elder in the church burned in an accident. My best friend Steve's death. I don't know if you've gotten to that part yet.
I did,
Uh,
mhm.
my niece and Steve happened boom, boom, right next to each other. I think the chapter is called the End of the Innocents. Um, and those were pivotal moments for me um, because where's God in this? Where is God? And then later on, I'm pastoring a church, and this young mother gets cervical cancer. I'm spoiling it for you. That's yet to come. But it's just another example of a God that's supposed to be present, not present. And so, if to answer your question, how did I end my faith and come to be an atheist? It was accumulation of those kinds of of moments and experiences. And then one day I was praying for a parking spot on a rainy day and I didn't get it. And I said, that's it. I'm done. No, I'm just
Mm.
kidding. I'm just kidding.
I I was thinking that you were serious, but you were just it was more that when that happened, you came to the realization that you had actually been done for a while, and this
Yeah.
just kind of
No.
brought it to light. Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
No, it was the bigger issues that um, God just wasn't showing up. And I finally gave myself permission to ask the hard question, is he even really there?
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, we have a couple of comments that I wanted to bring up.
Okay.
Jenny Morgan says, football players always thank God for the touchdown. God must love football. Where was God when that guy got knocked in the chest yesterday and went down with a box of rocks? Why would he do that?
Good
I
question,
was,
Jenny. There's a
yeah.
lot of football players praying for him now. I see on Twitter that
Hmm.
everybody's praying for this guy. Good luck with that. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, Franklin Graham had a picture up of everyone kneeling around him and was commenting about, everyone is turning to God in this time of need. And I responded that I certainly have a lot of sympathy, a lot of empathy for this player who's been injured, and I'm all for everyone showing him love and support. However, if he recovers, it's going to be as a result of the skill and the medicine provided by the medical staff. And yet, if he recovers, you're all going to give credit to God.
What if he doesn't recover, though?
And if he doesn't recover, I started to put that, but there wasn't enough room in a tweet. Unfortunately, because of character limits, there wasn't enough room. But what I wanted to add was, and if he doesn't recover, you're still going to say, well, God was still with him, or he's with God now.
He had other plans for
Right.
him. So why even fucking pray?
Mhm.
If it's
Mhm.
going to be whatever God decides anyway, which again, see, that doesn't make any sense. God gets the credit, and like Jenny said, you see, I mean, the ones who are most notable, if you watch football a lot like I do, um, it's the field goal kickers. When they kick a field goal, they point up, when they make it.
Mhm.
But when they
Mhm.
don't, you don't see them pointing up.
Down.
You don't see them
S
pointing
s
down. You don't see them pointing anywhere. It's so ridiculous.
Satan took that one.
Yeah.
Uh, but what I thought was even more interesting, though, was when I was watching the ABC News tonight, and they showed the exact same picture that Franklin Graham did. They had a completely different interpretation. They said the players were all forming a wall to shield the medical process from being seen by everyone.
Mm.
That they weren't kneeling around him to pray for him in some great show of faith, that they were trying to afford him some privacy.
That could be too. I do
Mhm.
know that players are well known to pray. A
Mhm.
lot of it's because I mean their coaches have been praying since. I mean, you look at the recent
Supreme Court
Supreme Court
case.
case where a high school football player was allowed to proselytize on the football field. This has been going on a long
That
time.
was the coach.
Yeah, the
That
coach
wasn't
is
a
what I
player,
meant.
it was the
Yeah,
coach,
I
yeah,
meant a coach. Yeah,
yeah.
this has been going on a long time. It just hasn't been getting the attention it deserves.
Mhm,
And so these players are so used to that. Prayers in the locker room, prayers after the game. It's conditioned into them. Many of them come from high faith households,
mhm.
especially the black community. There's a lot of these, probably 80% of NFL players are black, and they come from these environments where their moms and grandmas and sometimes even dads are high faith people. I mean, you'll hear the mom talking, God's had a plan for my boy since the beginning, and all of this stuff. So it's very common for them to quote unquote take a knee when something like
Mhm.
this is going on, and they're offering up prayers on Twitter and praying for you and all that kind of stuff. Uh, how much actual praying gets done is questionable at best. But that's just the habit patterns that they're used to.
Joe Stigpot says maybe prayers are more powerful when posted on social media. I think, well, he says mania. I'm not sure if that's a typo or
I
I
think
think he
it's
intended
intentional.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see those things on Twitter, and I'm saying, I see these guys, I'm throwing up a prayer for you, brother. Well, why don't you do that in your closet like Jesus said, instead of announcing it to the internet?
Mhm. Mhm.
Anyway,
Okay, this is taking a different turn here. Julie Wine and Reason said, had an extremely Catholic funeral for my mother on the 29th. Thankfully, no
excuse
one
me.
said anything about a divine plan. So, first of all, Julie, I'm very sorry about the loss of your mother and offer you my condolences. And I'm glad no one said, that this was God's plan for her.
Yeah, that can be hard, especially if someone passes away in our life that is what we would consider earlier than, an earlier than normal death. Not normal, but a younger person dying instead of we all die. I mean, let's just,
Mhm.
we do all die. Every one of us is fatal. None of us gets out of this alive. But it's different to me when someone who's 85 dies compared to someone who's 35. There's just a different life expectancy, life lived. There's so much life they didn't get to live. But that's, oh, she's got another note up here.
Mhm. She said she lived to be 80. She saw children, grandchildren, and great grandchildren. She had many friends and died holding my dad's hand. It was a natural thing.
That's it. That's
Mhm.
that's beautiful. See,
Mhm.
and that's the natural course of things.
Mhm.
And I guess when people say, God had a plan, it was God's plan, a divine plan. All they're saying is that this person died because they lived. I mean, that's just it. Dying is the natural result of living, and there's no divine plan needed for that. So when they insert God's divine plan into a natural event, they're just trying to Christianize it or religionize it, and it's just not needed. It's superfluous and unnecessary. And I'm glad
Mhm.
that you didn't have to endure any of that, Julie One and Reason, because it only makes it harder to
Mhm.
let go of someone when someone tries to come in and paint religion all over it.
A family member of mine has a plaque that he made of his grandparents that he has lost. And he has a picture of each of them. And at the bottom, he has this note: God only takes the good ones.
Hmm.
And even as a believer, I thought that was kind of stupid because I said, everybody dies.
Yeah. What happened? What
If
about who takes the bad ones? Satan?
yeah.
God, that is so stupid. Well, only the good die young. I mean, seriously? Yeah. We just make up. That's the thing about death and dying, and I've been talking about it a lot in the last 3.5 years with Dying Out Loud. And I think that what has resonated with people is me having a terminal disease, talking about dying and giving people permission to think about it and talk about it, um, making it more normal sounding and feeling, and not this scary boogeyman that's coming to get us. The the Grim Reaper, who's coming to get you. Well, hell, yes, he's coming to get us. He's coming to get all of us. And why do we make that a scary, evil thing? It's not. What we've got to focus on, once we come to terms with our mortality, which as Christians, if we were Christians before, we can get sidetracked in that because Christians don't come to terms with mortality very well. They're taught
Mhm.
that you live forever. I was taught that you live forever, and death is just a comma. It's just a little apostrophe. And then you wake up in the arms of Jesus and go skipping down streets of gold to your mansion. And how insane is that on its surface? Where is this? In the clouds? I mean, we could believe that when we didn't know what outer space was. But once you get
Mhm.
up above the atmosphere, you go, okay, where are these mansions? It's got to be in some other dimension. So what
Mhm.
are we supposed to be there? What kind of person? All that just falls apart when you start thinking about it very critically at all. But Christians really avoid the subject of death and the concept of death. And so what I found with the Christians in my life, my family and friends, they didn't handle my diagnosis very well at all. In fact,
Mm.
they just kind of kept away from me
Mhm.
and just
Mhm.
avoided talking about it. Whereas my atheist friends were saying things like, dude, we're here and I want to be there with you at the end, in the room with you.
Mhm.
I'm there, I'm present. I'm not running from this. I'm running toward it because you can't run from it. And if I'm your friend, I'm not going to run from it either. And
Mhm.
that's the difference between atheists and Christians is we're not afraid to look at our life and death and just recognize this is what it is. Now, what are we going to do about the one life we know we have? And that's the focus of what I've talked about all these years with dying out loud is making the most of the one life we know we have.
I have a very serious question for you along those lines. I have always faced my own mortality, sometimes in very unhealthy ways. Especially as a believer, I wanted to die as soon as possible because I wanted to be with Jesus.
Yeah.
And now that I'm no longer a believer, I want to live as much as I can, but I also face the fact that I don't have the genes for it. Um, One thing I tell people that they're totally shocked at is there are no widows in my family,
Hmm.
only widowers.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother lived to be 76, and she was the oldest. Her mother died at 70, two of her sisters died at 61. I do have an aunt that is now 70 as well, but I figure, 75 is pretty much the most that I can, hope for. And for
Mm-hmm.
me, that's 14 years away. But anytime I say something along those lines, it really upsets my youngest, who is 21.
Mm-hmm.
I have kind of a split family. My kids are 35, 33, and 21. I had a big break in the middle.
Yeah.
And right now, I understand that my 21-year-old still needs me, and so I try not to talk about my own mortality in front of my 21-year-old. And is that a mistake?
I won't. I mean, I'm no therapist, and I wouldn't advise you on what's right thing or wrong thing to do. All I'll tell you is what I do.
Mhm.
Um, I am aware that my death will affect the people around me more than it will affect me. I mean,
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
just the reality. I'm going to go to sleep and not wake up, and I'm not going to be aware that I didn't wake up. So it's not a big deal. Honestly, I won't be, on the other side of something saying, "Oh my God, I didn't wake up. I must be dead. Now what do I do?" That's not how this goes. Um, I I'm aware that when I don't wake up, Bevan, my family, my friends, the community that I've built in the secular world, they're going to miss me, and that's hard. It's hard for them, and I'm acutely aware of that. Now, me trying to cushion that for them does them no good, and me trying to pretend or help allowing them to pretend that I'm not going to die or you're going to live uh, longer and you're not going to die at 76 or whatever. And you don't know that you are, but you're looking at statistics and probabilities and averages, and I understand that. Um, but that's not their place to do that. And if I mean, I talk about death all the time. It's hard on Bevan, my partner, because she gets sick of hearing about it, and she's the one that's going to miss me the most, and it's going to affect her the most. But it's still not serving her well to pretend like it's not going to happen. And
Mhm.
the same for your daughter. I understand. I would say something like, "I understand what you're saying, sweetheart, and I know it's going to be
My
hard."
youngest is my son.
Oh,
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
That's
You
okay.
can still call him sweetheart. Um, I understand it's going to be hard for you, and I appreciate that, and I'm sorry about that. But it's a reality, and the sooner you come to grips with it, the better off you'll be when it does happen. And what we need to do, instead of worrying about how long I'm going to live or not, or when I'm going to die, is what can we do to make the most of the years that we do have? And let's focus on that
Right.
instead of how soon I'm going to die or how old I'm going to be or how young I'm going to be. What about the time I have now? Let's just focus on that the other stuff will take care of itself.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
that's how I would approach it and how I do approach it.
What I'm trying to do right now is a balance between a bucket list of the things that I really want to do before I die and spending more time with family.
Yeah, and I think those two go hand in hand. And
Mhm.
some of the bucket list things might include some families, so you might get to
Some
do
of them
all of
do.
that.
Yeah.
But I
Mhm.
think that's a great plan, and because you can't spend every day, just check checking off one bucket list thing after another. Most of us don't have the resources for that, or
Mhm.
the time.
Mhm.
Um, but those big moments, like I got to go on a scuba diving trip and ended up getting to play with an octopus in the
Oh,
Pacific Ocean.
cool.
That was an incredibly huge bucket list moment. That
Mhm.
I mean, the octopus was bonus. The bucket list thing was wanting to go scuba diving, and I had to go with the company that did adaptive scuba diving for people with disabilities
Disabilities.
like me.
Mhm.
Um, so this organization provided that as a grant, which is the nonprofit that we're um, trying to start, which we talked about last night. But we'll get into more of that before the end of the show tonight. But those bucket list things are great, and those big moments are incredible. But also the little ones, the day to day things, the conversations with family and friends, the just hanging out with somebody with no agenda on a Saturday afternoon and just enjoying a nice mild day somewhere. Those are just as powerful and just as important. And
Mhm.
if we are aware of what they can be and not let we the problem is we tend to let them slip by us, and we don't make a chance for the moments to happen. And
Mhm.
so if we're more cognizant of it and more aware of those kind of things all around us, then we're going to make more opportunities for them, I think.
Okay. That being said, "You're lucky, Dave. No one will care when I die." And I totally disagree. That being said, I've had you, you've been in the chat before, and we have all enjoyed your comments, and you've told us some of the work that you do, and it is important work. And I think that your patients, your clients will miss you when you are gone, and we certainly will miss you when you're gone as well.
Yep. I agree. There's always somebody there that's you're important to.
Let's see. Oh, Sarah says the link to Dave's channel in the description isn't working. I will fix that at the end of the program.
Hmm.
I used to scuba dive a lot.
Oh wow.
Mhm. But I can't do it anymore because of my spinal issues.
Hmm.
Unless I did something like you did, where I had somebody carrying my tank for me, because that's the thing I can't do. I can't carry the tank anymore.
Yeah, there are groups that do that. This organization arranged that with a um, we applied for a grant to get this experience, and they awarded it to us. Actually, it was supposed to happen a couple years ago, but COVID um, delayed everything. But they said that that they had an organization they work with in Hawaii. Would you mind going to Hawaii to go scuba diving? And I said, oh, let me think about that. Yeah, okay. Because I thought we'd go to, some lake in Michigan or something to do scuba diving, and I was going to be okay with that. But when they said Hawaii, I thought, oh my God.
One of the 2 best dives that I have done in my life were Cancun and Hawaii.
Oh my goodness.
And the one in Hawaii, that was the thing that was so remarkable about that one, is I was diving and I looked up and I could see the bottom of the boat.
Mm.
And normally when I'm diving, just 20 feet down, I can't see the bottom of the boat from there. And so when I looked up and I saw the bottom of the boat, I thought, oh, I must not be very far down. And then I looked at my depth gauge. I was at 90 feet.
Wow, that's some
The
clear water.
water was so clear that I could look up from 90 feet and still see the bottom of the boat.
Wow, that's cool. Yeah,
Mm.
that's quite an experience.
Mhm. Changing direction completely.
Okay.
I know you have done a number of things with the Clergy Project.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I've read in your book, you spent most of your life in Christian ministry, either professionally or as something on the side of what you were doing of your profession. Were
Right.
you still a professional minister when you deconstructed, and how has the Clergy Project been able to minister to you?
Um, I'm giving away a lot of the book you haven't read yet, Connie. But
That's okay. I'll read it anyway.
um,
But just don't give away too much so that people in the chat don't buy one. You
yeah,
guys got
no,
to buy the book.
yeah, it's you'll enjoy it. I've gotten incredibly good feedback with it. But it's I was actually not in the ministry. I'd been let go from the last position I held as an associate pastor, and there was a whole big drama there. You'll enjoy reading that. Maybe not. People have told me that part of the book when they were reading it, they threw it across the room. They were so mad. So I've got some damaged books out there. Um, no, I had left ministry, was still a Christian, going to a different church for another year or two. And so when I was going through my deconstruction process, I'd transitioned into the insurance business and was doing that as I was going through the deconstruction. And so I didn't have to transition from ministry to some other kind of work. But I did find the Clergy Project and found Dan Barker and talked with him on the phone because I was basically desperate to find anyone who'd been through what I'd been through and someone I could connect with and could relate to. And so that was a huge benefit to me in the very early stages of my deconstruction. And it was helpful to find men and women all around the country that had been through exactly the same thing because I felt so alone and a bit crazy because everyone in my world was thinking I was crazy for not believing anymore.
Okay. One of the impressions that I got from the book, and this is something that ended up making me reflect on my own life, was I watched how you meandered from one thing to another. And I thought, goodness, didn't he ever have any goals or set out, a plan that, okay, I'm going to do this and this and this and this and this. And I look back at my own life and I said, I really did the exact same thing. The only difference was that I made plans, but life always came along and
Mm-hmm.
put roadblocks in the way. And I ended up taking a very meandering path through life as well.
Oh, I did the same. I had the most haphazard, non-planned life. If God had a wonderful plan for my life, He was sure confused because I was. And a big part of that was because I got basically hijacked in my. I had plans to go to college and become a sports writer, but that all got hijacked by Jesus because when I got radically saved, I immediately felt like I needed to forego college and career because people were going to be dying. And I mean, I needed to save people and Jesus was going to come back. And everything was urgent for me at that point. And so I never got to college. And so
Mhm.
because of that, then getting married at a young age of 23, and then all those responsibilities come in. And so I was always scrambling just to pay the bills and keep things going. I was always flying by the seat of my pants and just figuring it out. And I attributed that to God, coming through and leading me and guiding me and giving me this thing to do. I would have a business at some point. Other times I'd have a job. Other times I'd be on staff at a church. But it was just the most convoluted life that you can imagine. And I don't know. That's one thing my son said when he read it. Of the three kids, the only one I know has read the book is my son. I don't know if the others have or not. I haven't asked him. But he just said two things. I mean, he called me one day and he said, "Hey, well, I'm reading your book," and I gulped and held my breath because I didn't know what he would think. And he said, "It's really, really good." And I said, "Well, thank you." And then he said, "I've got some questions." And I said, "Oh shit, here it comes." Um, and he had several. He said, "Did you really live in a trailer?" And, yep, yep, yep. Poverty in Arkansas. And then
Mhm.
he commented and he said, Dad, he said, you really went through a lot of shit in your life. And I really didn't know that.
Mhm.
And he said,
Mhm.
the other thing, Dad, is that I really didn't realize how much pressure you felt financially to make a living for us and pay the bills. I didn't ever know that. I didn't. And I said, well, I never let you guys see it,
Mhm.
but it
Mhm.
was always a weight on me every month, every year, a weight of how am I going to provide for this family? How am I going to pay the bills? And there were times that I really struggled, and other times I prospered. And but it was always that heavy sense of responsibility. I never felt like I had it figured out. And he
Mhm.
saw that. He picked that up in reading the book. And he said it really helped him appreciate more what it took to get me through, essentially.
Mhm. And it shows how successful you were, that the kids didn't even notice.
I faked it. fake,
Mhm.
fake
Mhm.
it till you make it.
My
Uh,
older 2 were quite well aware of how my youngest was raised differently than they were,
hmm.
because my older 2 were used to hearing, "We can't afford that," but when the youngest came along, we were at the point where we could afford pretty much anything we wanted, and so
Not fair, Mom. Not fair.
well, we would have to come up with more creative reasons for saying no because we can't afford it, just didn't work anymore. But the older 2 got the advantage of that when they were in high school.
Hmm.
When it was really important and it wasn't some toy that was they were gonna outgrow in a year or 2.
Yeah.
It was something important, we had the money for it.
Hmm.
Um, okay, there's a couple of comments that I wanted to bring up. Joe Stinkpot says, "Dave, thanks for using your days to inspire others. And what's your favorite drink?"
Bourbon.
Okay.
Bourbon and Coke. I usually have that most evenings.
And the ultimate
Thank you, by the
reductionist
way. I appreciate that.
says, "I support war against religion, against culture for culture's sake, against status quo or law and order for status quo or law and order's sake. We should be maximizing justice and minimizing suffering."
Yeah.
And we have a super chat. Thank you very much, Peyton Dooley, who says, "I'm 48 years old and only been an atheist for 3 years. My adult kids are evangelical Christians the way I raised them. I'm afraid to tell them, it will break their hearts. Is it better to keep playing along or come out?"
Ooh boy. That's the
I'll let you
19.
give your opinion and then I'll give you my opinion.
That's the $20 question.
Mhm. Mhm.
Oh, Peyton, that's tough, man. If you read my book, or if you haven't, you'll read. If you do read it, you'll see in there that I paid a really stiff price for my transparency with my kids. I felt an obligation personally to let people in my life know that I no longer believed, because I was such an outspoken Christian. I was always on the front lines of ministry. To me, it felt dishonest and inauthentic when I realized I no longer believed, to let people in my life continue to think I did. Now, I'm not, it's really none of their business at the end of the day. My children, my ex-wife, friends, it's my life. But I felt an obligation to share that with them. In retrospect, I maybe would have done it differently, a little more, a little less blunt, if you will. Um, but the flip side, because two of my three kids essentially cut me off at that point, and
Mm.
because they didn't know what to do with it, and it did hurt them. They're much like your story. They're evangelical the way I raised them. I taught them well. My son has since not followed me, but has come to his own conclusions. He and his wife, that they no longer believe in the Christian God as the Bible says. They kind of hold to some idea of something up there, but they've departed from the faith for all practical intents. So 2 out of 3 still are evangelicals, and one of the three still has me cut off. So it is a very tough thing to do. And I wouldn't advise you one way or the other. Everyone's story is different. Everyone's journey is different. The positive side of being able to be out, so to speak, is that I can be who I am. I can be authentic. I can be honest and transparent in any situation. I don't have to worry about who sees what or who knows what. I can be out and about on shows like this and talk about Christianity and the damages of it without worrying about whether my kids are going to see it, because I'm guessing they do. But it's your own personal journey, Peyton, and I just you know let God guide you. No, I'm just kidding. Um, but I wouldn't. I'll say this: just be careful that you don't let anyone tell you what to do in that regard, because it's a very personal choice, and there is a lot at stake. And so that's kind of my take on it. What do you say, Granny?
Okay. The situation I'm in is that, I also raised my children to be evangelical. I sent all three of my kids to private Christian school. Um, I had seen my middle child, my younger daughter, drifting from the faith.
Mm-hmm.
And she had a really good reason for doing so. It really started when she was in medical school and then when she was in residency. And medical school, she was either studying or in class 16 hours a day.
Yeah.
She really struggled through the first year of medical school and almost didn't make it. And residency, it was not unusual for her to be working 90 hours a week. And so she didn't have time for church, and I got that. And then when she met a guy and they were talking about getting married, I was very concerned about him not having a strong Christian walk. And he gave all the right answers to the questions, but
Mm-hmm.
I also got the impression that they were not his real answers, because what I saw in his life and what they were doing did not match what he told me he believed. And so I felt like they were kind of putting on a show for me because they knew that that's what I
Yeah.
wanted. Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was in a situation where my oldest was a very strong believer. My middle child was a very weak believer, and my youngest had gone to atheism. In fact, it was my youngest that convinced me that God wasn't real.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I was in a bit different situation. Now, my husband and I just celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary, and my husband is still a believer. And so I truly believe the best thing is to tell people. However, my oldest had already cut me off long before I deconverted,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't really know why she did it. And
Mm.
she has slowly come back and allowed me a little bit more back into her life. And she's aware that I've deconverted. I told her,
Right.
but she doesn't know any of the details or why, because she wants conversation to be short and to the point. And so she knows that I don't believe anymore. She's never asked any questions about it. She's never shown any interest. So I haven't given her any details. If she ever asks, I'll tell her.
Mm-hmm.
One of her kids did ask me a question, and I would have loved to have answered, but unfortunately, we were on our way out the door and I didn't have time to answer. Now, my husband, he's been probably the most interesting one. He has no problem with me not being a believer anymore. He still does his church thing.
Mm.
But since COVID has come, he does his church thing is now to take his computer and go in the bedroom on Sunday morning and watch church service, and they're
A lot
okay,
of
I'm
people have
done.
done that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
And when we were believers, I was the one that was always driving the train. I
Right.
was the one that said, if the doors are open, we are there. If there's a church activity, we are involved. And he was always the one of, can't we just be pew sitters? So in a way, he's kind of happy with my deconversion because it means, All he has to do is attend a church service once a week instead of having to do all the things that I was pushing us to do all the time.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, he's just, someone like him. I've seen others. He's just holding on to the idea of the faith that he's known. It's a comfort blanket for him. There's
Mhm.
no involvement. He's not studying the Bible. He's not praying and hearing God speak, and he's not trying to do any of that from what I can see. He likes the idea of there being the God that he's always believed in, and why rock the boat now? It's worked for me all these years. It doesn't take much from me, and I don't really care. That's easy. It's when
Mhm.
these kids like Peyton's kids, if they're very fervent in their faith, it really another element there is uh, what's the how much is it costing you to pretend? In other words, are you having to really fake it in their presence? Are you having to fake prayers and act like you're reading your Bible? Um, that I see in the chat there, he says that his fundamentalist says he tried to raise them. You failed there, obviously, and good thing you did. Um, a lot of times, if there's a little crack in the window, a crack in the door, it'll cause them to start thinking a little differently about their faith. And sometimes that can have a very positive effect on the whole thing. I've known people who've said things like, when their family members ask them, "Do you still believe?" They'll say, "I'm working through some things." They're kind of soft selling it for a while. And what that does is buys you some time and also gives them the notion that, oh, dad's questioning some things. I wonder what that's looking like. I wonder what he's questioning. And they may start questioning too. So there's different ways to chip away at it. And again, it really depends on much how much is it affecting you on a day-to-day basis or any kind of a regular basis. If they live in other parts of the country and you don't ever see it and they just assume that you're still believing like you did and they don't ever ask you about it, then you may not need to address it. But if they do start questioning you, then there's different ways to, um, like I said, ease into it, and you might find that helpful.
There is one aspect that I've hinted at a number of times and I don't talk about very much because there are some people that would be hurt if I did.
Right.
When I'm on somebody else's channel, a place where I know that my husband and my kids won't see it, then I'm a little bit more free talking about it. But on my own
Mm,
channel, there is one issue I will not talk about that was probably the most damaging thing to me as a believer.
mm. And the other part of, I'm kind of I know my mom is probably the one that's the most disappointed in my atheist and hurt by it. My brother, I've got a pastor brother he's just kind of mad about it, um, and wants to try to convince me every now and then. But it's, and I would tell in a gentle way any family member this: I'm sorry that my deconversion from or my lack of faith is upsetting to you, but it's my life, and the fact that it's upset you is you taking it's you putting more precedence on how you feel about my life than how I feel about it. And you need to think about that, mom. I would say this to my mom or my daughter or son or whoever. Why are you so upset about my life? And if you do think I'm going to hell, because I have said this to her, and you know that I'm a good person, and you know that I just asked too many questions for me to allow myself to continue to believe, but you know me as your son, and you know I'm a good person. If you believe the God you serve would send me to hell, knowing what kind of person I am, then you need to ask yourself some questions about this God that you serve and leave it at that.
Okay, I've got a couple of comments that came a while ago
Sorry,
that
my
I've
nose is itchy.
starred. Yeah, it's hard to keep up with. That being said, I say come out. Be a model of honesty and genuineness to your children. And a different opinion we have is from Sandy, who says, I lied and joined my mom's church as she lay dying on her ICU bed. After she died and I came home, I told the pastor the truth. He wasn't happy, but I have no guilt. And, I think this was a nice thing that Sandy did. Sandy
Yeah.
allowed her mom to die in peace.
Yeah, without adding turmoil to her life.
Mm-hmm. Sandy said, you should have seen Pastor Joe trying to find 3 elders willing to come to the ICU to swear me in. Okay, and completely a new subject. Congratulations to Harmonica Man. He says, this might mean something. I just won top 5 performers in the world on Spotify for 2022.
I'm assuming playing the harmonica. Good for you.
Okay.
The other element that I like those two viewpoints because it also depends on which family member we're talking about. I have a good friend who has chosen not to come out to his dad because his dad is really, really old, and it would only hurt him, and there's nothing to be gained from him knowing that. So it doesn't cost him anything to continue to pretend like he believes like he always did, because his dad, there's the conversations never come up. So he doesn't have to go and say, hey, Dad, by the way, I'm an atheist. I want you to know that before you die. There's no point in that. But to that being said's point, and something I've thought of with my kids and my grandkids, is I will be able to go to my deathbed and know that my kids, at least, and my grandchildren will at least be able to say that Dad and Pops was authentic. He was honest. He was genuinely true to who he was. And I want that to be said of me. I want that to be known of me. I wouldn't want them to know that I was inauthentic. I was dishonest about something that elemental. So it really depends a lot of times on who you're dealing with. If it's an aging parent or a child, there's just a lot of different connotations here. There's no pat answer. There's no black and white answer here.
Let's see. There was something I wanted to bring up, and now I got distracted by the talk about the wine and the grape juice.
Yeah.
Oh, what was it? Well, if it comes back to me, I'll bring it up. Let's see.
Had a very active chat room tonight.
Yes, yeah,
It's
I
hard to
usually
keep up.
do. Yeah,
It's hard
it
to keep
is.
up.
Yep, it is. Oh, I know what I wanted to bring up. I do not know if I will ever have the opportunity to tell my grandchildren about why I'm an atheist. So I made 3 videos aimed at children just for that purpose. The first video is aimed at 3 to 5-year-olds, and the second video is aimed at 5 to 7-year-olds. And this third video, I should say 5 to 8-year-olds, and the third video is aimed at 8 to 12-year-olds. And I figure anyone over 12 can pretty much watch most of what I make. There's a few things that I make that have some more sticky discussion matter, but most of it is pretty teen friendly. But anyway, I did make those 3 children's videos to try to explain, and if my grandkids ever find one, then they'll come to understand why Grandma doesn't believe.
That's a good idea. I may do something like that. I've been intending to write a note to each of my grandchildren, but I think a video might be more appropriate. And I have the advantage of working from whatever age they are now, because I've got 7 of them, and they range in age from 11 to newborn. So I can make videos for all those different ages. But that's a good idea, I think.
I have 5, and they range in age from 2 to the oldest will turn 11 in 3 more days.
Well, you'll probably be around long enough to tell them in person why you're an atheist.
Most likely I will, and I really look forward to that conversation, when they get to be 15, 16, 17 years old. I really look forward to those conversations.
Hmm. Well, I'm going to reserve a copy of my book for each of them, and Bevan's going to be certain that she gets it to them.
That sounds great. That sounds like a really great idea. Um, let's see. There was something else I wanted to bring up about the book. We've gone through all of the questions that I wrote out for the show for today, but there
Okay.
was one that kind of came to mind about another way that your life and my life. Oh, I know what it was. That your life and my life have a lot of parallels to them. Um, you're just about 5 years ahead of me. um, because we both came to Christ as teenagers.
Hmm.
And we both came from homes that were, just mildly believed in God, but not really. And then we both got, completely into the life, and it became our entire life.
Hmm.
And then we came out of it. One thing that I find is that I almost feel an obligation to deconvert all the people that I converted.
Mm.
And I don't mean that specifically, that, that I need to go to the specific people that I've preached to or taught, but rather that because I spent so much of my life doing this, I need to spend at least a little bit of my life kind of undoing it. Do you ever feel like that?
Well, you are doing that with your channel,
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
and so
And that's why I'm here. Yeah.
any one of them can find it, and many of my former church members have found my stuff and reached out to
Mm.
me,
Mhm.
um, on both sides of the aisle. Some of them having come to similar conclusions, and others of them scolding me for being mean to God or whatever, however they want to put it. Um, I don't feel the obligation to do it, and the reason for that, not that I don't feel bad about the things that I taught and thought, because I did I did pass on some very bad advice, but I did it with good intentions, and I refer to this quote that was attributed to Maya Angelou, and it says this: "Do the best you can do until you know better, and then when you know better, do better." And that is all we can do. Um, I was doing the best I could do as a believer. I really was all in. I did it for the right reasons. I had the right motivations. I had the right convictions, and I don't fault my former self for that, because I was doing it, like I said, for all the right reasons. When I changed my mind about God, I came to the conclusion that, okay, I was wrong. Now, how can I do better? And all of this work post deconversion is me attempting to do better. And so I don't live with regret, because regret's a really, really costly emotion that can eat you up inside if you let it fester too much. So I
Mm.
think the healthiest thing to do is to say what I just said. I feel bad that people are still in this toxic way of thinking, and I feel bad for any part I played in that, but I don't regret it, because I was doing the best I could. And now I'm open out here, and any one of them can find me, and I'm willing to talk to anyone about why I changed my mind. And
Mhm.
so that's the best you can do, in my opinion.
Okay. Okay. That's very helpful. That being said, asks, do you know of any good forums communities for Aspies like me who have a hard time with maintaining these kinds of social connections? And I have a recommendation for you, and that is Purple Rhymes with Orange. Purple Rhymes with Orange does 3 shows a week. I believe it's the Thursday one that's in the evening. Twice a week, it's at noon, and it's all just social connections. Um, Purple usually will invite anyone on that wants to come on if you want to come on the show yourself. If you don't want to come on the show, Purple and her guests always interact with the people in the chat, but I
That's great.
highly recommend that one for social connections.
That's great.
Mhm. Do you have any that you recommend, Dave?
No, I think that's probably the best you could do right there.
Okay. Let's see. Soren says believers use our intellectual loneliness against us. And yeah, that probably is the biggest issue with the atheist community. We don't have a lot of community. There aren't atheist leaders. And I don't know if you know Chris in Australia. He calls himself atheist pastor.
Mm,
And he's great because that's what he is. He's kind of like a pastor to atheists. And
hmm.
atheists need pastors too. We don't need spiritual guidance. We don't need someone that's going to tell us that God is with us. But all of us need people who are there with us in times of need. And that's what a pastor is really supposed to be doing. And so atheists need pastors
I
too in
guess I'm
that
still a
respect.
pastor then because I do a lot of that. I do a lot of
Mhm.
community building and trying to connect people. I've many times been able to connect people that live in the same area. They live in the same town and they didn't know it. And I've been able to, because they've reached out to me separately, and I've been able to say, "Wait, you said you live so and so? I know someone that lives there," and I put them together, and
Mhm.
they become
Mhm.
friends and they form a community. And so it's not. It is the biggest work of the secular world is developing community because it's not ready made like it is in the Christian world. If you're a Baptist and you move to another town, you just go to First Baptist and you've
Mhm.
got everything built in. You got the youth group, the children's ministry, the men's ministry, the women's ministry, all the stuff right there. Singles, swinging singles, all the gray hairs. You got everything. And as secular people, we don't. Now there are Unitarian congregations and free thought groups that are, but you have to dig a little deeper to find them.
Mhm.
Um, and
Yes.
and so that's it takes work, and you've got to be more intentional about it. And we do need to
Mhm.
facilitate that. Those of us who are out here in the front, we need to facilitate that as much as we can.
Jenny, if you don't mind, could you put a link to Purple Stream in the chat? And then after that is up, I will pin that for anyone that wants to go and see Purple Stream.
I saw Joe
Um,
Joe Stinkpot had a comment that popped up.
yeah.
I don't know who that is, but I'm curious now that you connected this 46-year-old with a 22-year-old, Dave. I don't know who that is, but that's kind of what I'm talking about. It must be an example of that. So I'm glad. Whoever
Mhm.
you are, Joe.
This comment is surprising to me. Johnny says, I'm in Ohio, so there are more atheists here, but mostly I socialize through gamings. We're partway through Horde of the Dragon Queen in D&D. The only thing I'm surprised at is I know how much Ohio is a red state, and so I just have always associated Ohio as being one of the more conservative and more religious states. Now, obviously, not as much as where I live in Alabama or Mississippi, but it's interesting that although on the other hand, Ohio does have some good sized cities, and that's usually where you're
Oh
more
yeah,
likely to find
there's a
unbelievers.
little pocket. Oh, I see now, Joe Pellerito. I thought that might be you, Joe. Hey, buddy. Um, yeah, I remember that now. Seth and connected. They live in the same town, and we put them together. Um, yeah, there are little pockets of I call them blue pockets in the red states, and every state has them. And I have found that people who live in the most remote parts of the reddest states can still find someone in fairly close proximity if they know where to look or how to look, or if we can help them find each other. Because it again, it takes a little work, but like we had a retreat. We have an ex-Christian retreat every year in East Tennessee in the Smoky Mountains, and there was a young couple that was on my channel one night, and I think he won one of the mugs or something, and I shipped it to him and found out where he was. He lived not far from East Tennessee, and so when the retreat came up, he said, "We're really isolated here. Nobody in our town. We have no one." And I said, "Well, you want to come out, hang out with a bunch of heathens in the Smokies?" And they did, and they came and met a bunch of like-minded people and had a wonderful weekend. And it was they actually were about the closest ones to the retreat of everyone from around the country that came. So again, the opportunities are there. You just have to dig a little deeper to find them if you want them. Some people are happy, you know, not connecting in person, and that's fine too. But for those who want to have human connection with like-minded people, it's there, and I, for one, am happy to facilitate that. I know
Mhm.
you are too, Granny.
Yeah, I am. I would like to be involved with a local group as well, and I was involved with a local group of free thinkers, and then the pandemic hit, and that was the end of our group. There's been some things online about getting back together, but the problem is the group doesn't really have any leadership. No one was ever the leader of the group, and
Need a
so
pastor down there.
yep, yep. Rattel says, "It's a bit funny. Christians might have been right about D&D. I find it to be an excellent alternative to church."
Mm.
Uh, Johnny says, "I was only saying in comparison to the South. I'm in Akron, part of Akron, Canton, Cleveland, Kent Metroplex. Every county outside of the cities has gone red the last two presidential elections."
Hmm.
So yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is the big cities. Sandy says East Tennessee is about 7 miles from me, but the Smokies are several hours. Okay, we are caught up in the chat now. Any thoughts on any future books, or what are you thinking about doing in the future?
A lot, actually. Although I'm running out of time, literally, I do have a lot I still want to do. Which is the reason we put the show on hiatus. Last night was our last GD show for the foreseeable future, for two reasons. One is I've got another book I'm working on called Dying Out Loud, which is essentially the things I've been talking about in Dying Out Loud for the last 3.5 years. The subtitle would be "What Dying Has Taught Me About Living," or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, the things I've been saying on YouTube shows and podcasts, and the talks I've given around the country, is looking at life and looking at death and looking at Christianity, looking at atheism, and the things I've learned, a lot of the stuff that I've heard from people about. That's the book that I'm working on, and I've found when I wrote the first one, if I don't write every day consistently and really, really hammer at it, it doesn't get done.
Mm-hmm.
And a weekly show, as you know, is a lot of work, and it's a lot of mental energy. A lot of focus has to be applied to it, getting guests, preparing for it, being in the right place on a Monday night at 9 o'clock, all those things. And I just can't do that. And the second thing that we're devoting attention to this year is starting a nonprofit foundation to serve people with ALS and other terminal diseases, to provide for them the kinds of experiences that I've benefited from. But it's going to be a nonprofit um, that is specifically atheist. And that it's
Mm-hmm.
not just for atheist people. You don't have to be
Mm-hmm.
exclusively atheist to be awarded a grant for an experience. But
Mm-hmm.
the person who does receive the grant is going to know that it came from a non-religious organization founded by an atheist who viewed this one life as the only one we have, and that we don't need God to be good to one another. In fact, we are good to one another because there's no God, and the things that we do to help each other are the only way we get help from each other, because there's no God helping anywhere. And so that's the gist of the foundation, and we're going to be putting that together this year, and we need to really give some attention to it. And so I really can't do those two things and do a weekly show at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to let that go to focus on these things. Now I'll still be doing shows like this. I'm doing Matt Dillahunty's show tomorrow night. I'll be on the Atheist Experience on Sunday. So I'll still do guest spots like this, but those don't require near the focus and effort as doing my own show. So that's kind of what's going on right now, and then we do have some plans to travel and speak, scheduled for 4 different conferences next year, and probably we'll add more, and probably some smaller speaking things at colleges. I'm going to be at a couple of colleges next year. One at Florida State, which has not been scheduled yet, and then another one in East Tennessee State University. I think someone said they live in East Tennessee.
Mhm.
So come see
Mhm.
me there if you can. But I love doing colleges because the kids are very curious and they ask great questions, and I love good Q&A. So that's kind of what I got coming up.
Okay, that being said, ask, what is your Myers-Briggs personality type? Do you know?
I've done these things. I know, I don't know. I don't really know. I've been told several times that I've done it, but I can't ever remember. Sorry.
Okay, that's okay.
I'm an empath. I know that's one of them. I know I'm an E. I think that's the letter one. So I don't know anything else other than that. INFP. That's what he says. I'm an empath. I know that.
Uh,
Sorry, I have to
yeah,
drink.
he says, "I'm hoping you're an INFP so I can at least claim to have the same type as someone like you."
I don't know. I don't know. Sorry, man.
Okay, Peyton Dooley says, "It's tough being an atheist in Alabama. You don't come out at work. It could affect your workplace negatively, so it's hard to meet others." And Peyton, you're absolutely right. Being in Alabama, I perfectly understand, but on the other hand, since I'm retired, I really don't care who hears that I'm an atheist because I don't have to face some of
Yeah.
the things that you would have to face in a workplace. Um, th that being said, not referring to the person, um, I really think there are a lot more atheists here than we realize, and I think
Yeah.
too many of us are hiding,
Yeah.
and I almost feel like going out in public with a table that says, "I'm an atheist, convince me otherwise,"
Yeah.
or
No, I think
"Ask
you're
me
right.
about my atheism," just to make it more public.
Yeah, I've wanted to do something like that. I toyed with an idea for like a video show called The Atheist Next Door, with the premise that we interview an atheist in a small town, maybe don't even give their name, or maybe do. I don't know. I'm toying with the idea, but the point being that someone would discover that there's another atheist living 2 blocks from you, but neither
Mhm,
one knows it because neither one has said anything about it. And because one came out, the other said, "Hey, me too." And I've
mhm,
I've heard of that happening with friends. A good friend of mine who lives in Pennsylvania was driving with a friend of hers, and the friend asked something about God, and my friend said, "Well," and she kind of hesitated, "I don't really believe that anymore," and just took the plunge. And the other said, "Oh my God, me too. Let's talk." And
mm,
so those kind of things happen all the time. But until one person says, "Oh, I'm going to go for it," the other person doesn't know. And so we have two people hiding who would benefit from each other knowing. So,
I was that way with sexual orientation.
mhm.
Um, Someone brought up, asexual, and I said, "Really? What's an asexual?" And they described what an asexual is and what are some of the things they feel. I went, "Oh, that's me."
Yeah,
I just didn't know it,
yeah,
and the biggest symptom of it was way back in my teen years when all the girls were going gaga over various stars, and I was always like, "I don't get it," it's just a guy, who cares?
yeah,
And I never felt any attraction to women either, so I don't I didn't know until I was, gosh, probably 57 that I'm an asexual.
yeah. Well, you learn all the time. I saw Julie Wine and Reason said she's in Tennessee. I don't know where you are in Tennessee, but
She's Julie, do you mind my saying? Because I know exactly where Julie is. I've been to Julie's house.
because I'm from Nashville, and there's a huge ex-Christian atheist community in Nashville, and the surrounding area out around is at least about 50 to 60 miles from Nashville. We used to have weekly meetups. I don't live there anymore. I'm in Charlotte now, but I know people all over. Um, uh, the Nashville area. She said, "Say it." So, are
Yep,
you
she
close to
said say it.
Nashville?
She's in Memphis.
Oh, okay. No, there's no atheists in Memphis. No, I'm just kidding. I know there are. In fact, I have a follower or a supporter, a fan. I don't know what to call people, who lives outside of Memphis. I think in like Holly Grove or Holly Springs or somewhere near Memphis. So they're there. I know that.
Actually, Sandy, I do the exact same thing. I actually
Yeah.
live in Madison, Alabama, but nobody knows where Madison, Alabama is, but everyone knows where Huntsville is.
Yeah. I know Madison. I've got some good friends that live in Madison. That's one of the places we stay when we go to visit is Madison. We always have meetups there. Whenever I go to town, we have a meetup. Have a bunch of ex-Christian atheists, and we just hang out and absorb one another's goodness.
Okay, we are getting close to the end of the show. So first, Dave, is there anything else that you would like to bring up that we haven't talked about yet? Or do you have any closing comments?
If you haven't seen my channel, go to my website, daveoutloud.org. There's a fundraiser my partner Bevan's doing, a 60 at 60. She's running 60 miles for turning 60 years old.
Cool.
With Kenneth Leonard, he's helping do that as well. It's going to be in Kansas in March, and you can see all the details on that. There's a link from my website, daveoutloud.org. If you want to get involved in that, you can see what it's about. It's to a different nonprofit, similar to the one we're going to start. There's several nonprofits that do these kinds of events and experiences for people with ALS, because the thing with ALS is, you could watch my show last night. I talked more at length about it. I won't go into it in great detail, the GD show on my YouTube page. But people with ALS are afraid to go and spend money on a trip or an experience because they don't know how long this is going to last and what they're going to need money for, equipment or medication or hiring caregivers or whatever. And so they're afraid to do these things for themselves. But if we can do them for them and provide that for them, we've lost Granny. She's now a spinning circle. I don't know if anyone's hearing me. Someone put in the chat whether you're hearing me or not. Anyway, you can see it all on my website. Yeah. Ever change in North Carolina? Beach Sugar. Oh, I saw somebody. Oh, she's in North Carolina now. Hey, Sandy. Wait. Yeah, Sandy's in North Carolina, high country. Well, you're not far from me in Charlotte, Sandy. I don't know if we're still here now because, okay, I'm being heard. She'll be back maybe. I don't know what's happening. She's left the building. Elvis has left the building. Well, folks, thanks for tuning in tonight. We appreciate everyone coming in. We appreciate all the people in the chat room. Thanks, Granny, for stopping in tonight and being with us. It's been a pleasure to have you. I just took over the show, which is all I know to do now. You're here, Dave. The show is all mine. So what do you want to talk about? No, I've got to go, actually. As you can tell, I'm out of voice. My voice is good for about an hour and a half. But it's been great being on here. And I'm guessing Dave can't end the show. I can hang up my end of it, I guess. Sorry, Granny. I know what it's like to have technical difficulties. It's not fun. Beach. That's a pro, Dave. Ending the yeah, I'm a pro. You're right. I feel bad for Granny because I know she's scrambling frantically to reboot and do all the things that you do when the shit hits the fan. Here she comes, just in time to say
I
goodbye.
lost power for a bit. Sorry, I got my power.
That's okay. I took over.
Good. I'm glad you had enough to say to cover it.
Oh, I've always got something to say, but I am getting raspy and out of voice, so that's all I've got
Okay,
to say.
I was getting ready to close down anyway.
Yeah, I know you were.
Just want to announce what's going on. Next week, my guest is going to be Tax the Churches. The topic we are going to be discussing is the philosophy of time. If anyone else is interested in getting in on that discussion, if you have a background in philosophy, please contact me on Twitter or by email. And I would like to get another person or two on the panel if I can. There's several people that I've asked that it just didn't work out for. I would love to have Trolley Dave on, but I know that it is an ungodly hour for Trolley Dave. It starts at 1 or 2 in the morning. So that's what we're doing, and it really came about as a result of the discussion I had last week with, or actually a couple weeks ago with Dr. Ryan Mullins, and it came up some of the ideas of what it means that God is timeless, and I didn't realize
Mm,
that there were different ideas of what it means to be timeless, and so
hmm.
wanted to explore that a bit more.
Well, Ryan's
Um,
great. Tax the
mm.
Churches is great.
And scripted video this week. I took a section of the conversation I did with Dr. Mullins, and did some analysis of that stream. And so that's what I have coming up.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming, and thank you so much to everyone in the chat. Your comments and your questions have been great. And Dave, I have enjoyed your book immensely. It is very well written. I highly recommend it. And yeah, thank you for being here.
All right. Good night.
All right. Good night. Live your life.